Okay, we're live. So hello everyone. Thanks again for inviting me, the family. We've known each other, and I'm very happy to be here with Balthazar, which has known me for quite a while and knows a lot of my go-to-market experiences. We actually met when we were living in Southeast Asia together and working for Rocket Internet. And since then, I've actually spent time between launching and going to market for with specific products for existing startups, and then also launching my own startups. So I hope that some of the things I talk about are going to be relevant for you, and I'm happy to take questions after that. So let's start with why. Actually, this is I copied this sentence from a great book that I've read, and I suggest everybody to read this. And why do I say that it's important when you think about your go-to-market to start with why? It's because it's impossible, a little bit like when you sail, to know exactly where you're going to end, because the wind changes, the weather changes. And so in a startup, it's impossible to know what's gonna happen, how your startup is gonna go. It's not like Google Maps. You put an endpoint and it tells you exactly how to get there. That would be very easy. But actually, when you start a startup, you have no idea what's gonna come. So my first advice has always been to think about why you're doing this startup and who you're doing it for. So once you have really defined your why, it's much easier to understand who is your market and who you want to go for, who you want to target initially. Obviously, your market could change over time, but you have to start with somewhere, so you define it initially. And I'm going to make a lot of examples in these slides, because I think theory is very good, all well, but actually when you have to put things in practice, it's a little bit more complex than a book. I'm gonna start with an example of a why that I had identified actually completely wrongly. I was in Malaysia and I was with a team, and we wanted to start a project on creating a platform like a TripAdvisor, I would say, for restaurants, where you could also book the restaurant. And I know it sounds really awkward that was something, but in Malaysia in 2012 there was really very little on the internet. Most bars and restaurants weren't even online, and we thought, this makes a lot of sense in Europe. Why isn't there nothing here? And we had just moved there, and it was always very hard to find spots. So we thought the why was like obviously creating for consumers a better understanding of a market and understanding of a city, and finding services they needed. And actually we went to a lot of restaurants to tell them to come online, to come on our platform, to get photos, to set up their page, etc. And we wanted them to pay for us doing this for them. And clearly most of them didn't understand why they needed this, and they didn't want to spend any money, and they were used to foot traffic and people coming through regularly, so they really didn't want to pay. And we realized we were actually getting the whole market wrong, and that they never really would have picked up this way. And we had identified a need for us, but then the person who was paying didn't see that need in the same way. And so that was a complete failure. And another great thing was fail fast. So if you understand your market is not the right one, decide to close it down pretty quickly, your startup, and move on to a new project. So from this lesson, what was really interesting is to learn and to understand who these early adopters would be. In our point of view, it would have to be restaurants, and they weren't going to be there. And when people talk about influencers, I think it's really important to remember that influencers is not Chiara Ferragni, who has millions of users, but it's actually people locally who have micro communities who can help you reach a go-to-market faster. And so if you want to target restaurants, it can be a restaurant owner who has other friends who have restaurants, and therefore it can help you get to that market faster. I think that's a great lesson to learn. There's a lot online. It's always all about like mega giga influencers that ask for a lot of money. And instead, I learned very fast that the real influencers that count are micro communities of influencers. So that's something you should always keep in mind when defining your go-to-market strategy. I'm going to tell you a little bit of stories about also how to execute on your go-to-market strategy. So once you've identified who you want to target and how you want to go target them, you have to understand your target market fit. So when I was with Balthazar in Southeast Asia, I was told to help the sort of growth and launch of Zalora, which is a platform like Zalando in Europe, e-commerce of fashion in Southeast Asia. And two of the things that we saw very quickly was that we had no idea what people wanted in e-commerce in Southeast Asia, probably very different than what they wanted in Europe. And the second problem is we didn't know how they would pay for stuff, because nobody in Asia had a card at the time, and apps where you paid a cash through an app were non-existent. So the process of like actually delivering a product took forever, because a person ordered and then they would go to their bank and do a bank transfer, and then we had to confirm the bank transfer came in and then send the order. So obviously you can imagine this would take a long time, and it wasn't really optimal. So to come through these two problems and to understand how to get to the market better, one of the lessons I've learned, and actually is one of the lessons I take in all of my startups, is that having no money, so having to do things with very little money, is really a strength instead of a weakness. A lot of times you think you need a lot of capital to prove and to go to market and to prove what you're doing. And instead, very often, what I've learned is that having no money is your strength, because you have to find ways to do things in a smarter way. So one of the things we used to do in Zalora was to put products that we didn't have in our warehouse online, and then we would see which one clients would choose, and we would immediately go to our website where we would find it and buy that product and get it to us in the warehouse and then send it to the consumer. Obviously, this took a little longer, but it gave us a lot of insight of what consumers wanted. So this is a very tactic that a lot of people do. They scrape the internet, put a lot of things on their actual site, e-commerce, whatever, and they actually have very little of it. It's not very profitable, because clearly you're not making money when you're buying it from somebody else, having to get it shipped and then shipping it out. But it's a great way to sort of fake it and seem bigger than you are, and to understand trends and understand how people are behaving and what they're looking for in your specific market. The other issue that we had was the issue of people not paying. And one of the great things that I've learned in startups is that you can actually choose to go against a wall and try and break it down. And sometimes a lot of startup founders tell you should break walls. I mean, I think it's Zuckerberg's thing. I think there's also a good way, when you see a wall, to find another way and be innovative and try and find ways that can overcome that wall. So sort of change the route a little bit. And one of the things that we did with Zalora was actually to introduce cash on delivery, which was a very new thing, but we allowed people to order and receive their order and get cash and pay in cash directly to the delivery boy, which was an intelligent concept, if you want, but again, it was a terrible execution strategy, because we didn't realize that we were putting a lot of money in the hands of delivery boys that were probably collecting in a day of deliveries more than a month of their salary. or a year of their salary sometimes. So obviously what would happen is they would run away with the cash. So that wasn't a very good strategy. And we had to find new ways to go and introduce a safer cash on delivery method through like legitimized companies that would have insurance and indemnity on the money, etc. But the idea in itself is a good way to see how to solve a problem when you have a roadblock. After I worked in Dalora, I actually was hired by a small startup called Uber at the time, and they had only 4 or 5 people in Europe and less than 100 across the world. And it was my first experience with marketplaces. So go-to-market in a marketplace is a very different beast than in a B2C market traditional, because you have 2 markets that you have to sort of balance, demand and supply. In the case of Uber, it was cars and drivers and people riding, sorry. And obviously, you need a balance of the 2 to make it work. You can understand this. There's no drivers, nobody's going to use the app. If there's no riders, no drivers are going to stay. So you have to maintain the incentives. And one of the most interesting things I found out from working on marketplaces is that everybody is really obsessed all the time about the demand. So how many people are going to use your app? Because that's the traditional KPI of like a traditional B2C company. But actually, marketplaces are run by supply. So when you think about go-to-market in a marketplace model, if you're thinking about a startup in a marketplace, always think about supply first. If you fix supply, I promise you demand is going to come. But supply is the first one you have to lead with. It's worked every time. It works with most startups. It's now like a thing that is kind of common practice. But at the beginning with Uber, we never really understood this initially until we really had to face it on our own. So Milan was a great market when I launched because of fashion. There were a lot of foreign people coming, so we had like a demand per se without even having to build it initially in the city. And so we ultimately focused on supply because we knew it was the weaker side of the market. And again, about faking it until you make it, drivers were like, who are these kids who are coming here and think that I will use their platform? I don't trust them. Are they going to pay me? Whatever. So I remember we rented an office, like a desk in a co-working space, one of the first few co-working spaces in Milan. And there were probably 100 desks there. And we would invite drivers to come into the office, and we would tell them that the whole office was of Uber, so that it felt like there were a lot of people, even though we were like 3 people. And then we would sit them in a room, and we would guarantee a weekly income initially. So we would tell them, this is how much you're gonna, if you do X number of hours, we give you this amount. We would pay on a weekly basis, which was one of the big advantages that Uber brought to this driver market. And it actually started to create demand. The other easy way to generate demand is we would go at airports, we would go places, train stations where drivers would be waiting for passengers, and we would literally hassle them until they listened to us and would sign up to Uber platform. So this is a great way of seeing how to engage with your marketplace. If you have some money to spend it on generating supply first, because if you spend it on generating demand and then there's no cars, consumers are not very nice. They will open the app and forget about it if you don't satisfy them in the first time. So focus on your supply. And we actually created a model to understand how much we would allow users to make in an efficient time. So when there was good enough demand and supply, we would pay them that at the beginning. And then as the demand picked up, slowly pay less and less as a guaranteed fee to the drivers until after 12 weeks, I think it was, we managed to kind of let the market work on its own. So if you have a really good plan and a really good Excel model on this, and you know how you're going to execute, and you find every single way to build up your supply, it's a great way to really go to market and build your market. One thing I would remember is that in marketplaces you have two markets, not only one. So if you are a joint team of founders, make sure one thinks about one and one thinks about the other, or have two people thinking about the two markets separately, because you can't forget about one over the other. Otherwise, your business is never going to work. So remember what I said at the beginning about the whys. This time you have to remember two whys and understand how you can bridge that gap of putting these two markets together. On the other hand, I actually think marketplaces are tremendous opportunity, because they're highly scalable if they work, and very low asset intensive, because you're actually just a platform putting two sides together. So if you can make it work, they're very efficient, and then they can scale very, very fast. I've talked until now about experiences that I've had in other startups where I was launching products. I'll actually talk about really what it means to launch from the start. After Uber, I actually started my own startup called OvoMoney. It's a platform that allows users to save and invest very simply, starting from €1. And when we launched the product, we knew what we wanted to do. We had a why. We understood exactly the issue. It was an issue that, and like many founders, we had ourselves, and we didn't know really what tools to use for financial planning, let's say. And we talked to friends and really understood there was a need generally for our generation. And one of the things that we realized, though, is we had no investment at the beginning. So we were like, how can we test that this is actually going to work? I mean, it works. We need it and our friends need it, but that's not enough to start a company. How can we prove there's a $1 billion market? And one of the things that I always don't like, I would suggest, is don't spend a lot of time reading research papers on how big the market is and getting consultants to tell you to make some fancy slides, but actually find ways in which you can do things that generally do not scale, but can give you a very good idea of what your market is and how to go get it after that. So when we had to start Oval, a couple of things that we did was we created a group on Facebook of friends and made people add themselves to this group. It was about a few hundred people, and we gave everybody an Excel. We said, this is gonna be your cashless month. Let's see how you spend on your card. Tell us how much you spent. Put all your expenses on an Excel file. This was before you could do reading bank accounts data, obviously. So we asked people to put their expenses on an Excel for a month and then send us all the Excels. And the reason why we were doing this is because we had analyzed the idea of doing saving. There was a startup in the US that would do take your cents, so round up. Let's say you were spending, I don't know, €10, 15 cents. It would take 85 cents, so round up to 11, and put it in your saving account. And we wanted to see how much was card penetration in Italy, the type of transactions people did, and if people were doing this saving rule, if they actually were saving enough money, which we had decided was going to be around €100 a month to make the platform sort of work and make sense. And what we realized is that actually when we saw these Excels is that people use cards very little in Italy, and they still do, unfortunately, and that they only use it for very large transactions. So these kind of cents that were being accumulated, which in the US makes a lot of sense because you pay coffee with a card, don't make any sense in Italy. So we had to sort of rethink how we were going to do saving and make people save. So again, you can't just take a startup in the US, copy it, and try and say, okay, this is the same thing I'm going to do. You have to sort of figure out if it's going to work for your local market. And with all this Excel data, obviously it helped us also get a sense of like actually how much our user base was earning and how much they spent compared to their earnings. So how much really they were able to save, and so get a real idea of what our target KPIs were going to be then. One of the second things we learned is that you could be creative and build a solution without even having the solution. So we actually didn't have an app, and we launched anyway without the app yet ready. And you can generate demand for a product without there being a product yet. And this is something that a lot of startups now do. And I think it still works really well. So putting up like a web page or a type form and asking people a few questions and getting their email, which is the most important, or phone number, a way to contact them. While you tell them about what you're doing, and maybe using events or the press to sort of pre-launch, you already start to accumulate a really good initial waiting list, let's say, of users, and that helps you a lot, because when you sort of really launch, you launch that day with a lot of momentum, and you've already accumulated sort of your community that will help you in time. So this was not really initially, but we realized it a little late. But after a year in Oval, we realized that a lot of users were actually writing to us. They wanted to give us advice. We were really creating a little community around financial education. And so we decided to open a Facebook group, a closed group. And that was the best way, I think, that we used then to scale at a very low cost. So this group was just a community of people, and they would write to each other. And when somebody wanted to know about Oval, it was very easy. They looked Oval online, this group popped up, they asked questions. So it was actually our kind of like customer support without paying for it. They asked questions to the other people in the community, who were very happy to help and answer and engage, and having somebody else tell someone that they're using the app and they like it was very good as a conversion method. So I would have said one thing that I did wrong is, once you create these like demand initially, don't forget about it. It's not just a mailing list. It's actually a community of people. Use them as much as you can all through your journey in your app, because they can be of support. On the other side, don't always listen to what they have to say. I mean, Ford famously said that if he had listened to people, he would have built faster horses and not a car. So you don't need to always listen to what they want, but they clearly are a great way of generating demand for you, and a strong way for really understanding your market. So I would close by saying, don't spend any money or time on very fancy business plans and Excel models, and spend more the time you can with getting your hands dirty with your target market. You would be surprised how much you can learn from that. That's it.
Thanks, Benedetta. I've indeed known Benedetta for close to 10 years now. My first ever work experience in Asia. And Benedetta is way too modest, which has really been at the start of a couple of businesses that gathered hundreds of thousands of users in different geographies. And I don't think you ever came before the very, very beginning. And there are a lot of things that you said that I emphasize and that I completely agree with. The first one is keeping that absolute proximity with your users and talking to them, whether it's through a Facebook group or just getting your hands dirty and going out to talk to them. And the second one is the intensity with which you need to do it. And it's some sort of relentless race to find those clients. And the things I've learned is that there are no shortcuts to finding clients. There is no partnership in the beginning that does work. There is nothing is going to bring you hundreds of clients at once. It's always one by one, and from every customer you get, either you went to catch him, or if you get him for free, you should talk to him anyways. to understand why he came. That was your first point, to start with why. It's also true for why do clients use your product. And
Correct.
for every person thinking about go-to-market, I always find that they're not specific enough about who they're selling to. They're going to say, I'm selling to SMBs in Italy. But there are hundreds, thousands different SMBs. Whether you talk to the founder, to the accountant, or to the lawyer in the SMB is really different. And so the only way to really get that specific is exactly what you described, which is to go get them one by one.
Yeah, and never stop, because I think one of the things that I've always done in Oval, even 5 years in, and with the whole customer support team, I spent at least an hour every week, if not more, on support. So I always would like to answer people's questions all the time. So it's a great way to keep in touch with the community, no matter how big your startup becomes.
Yeah. And there was a question from the audience that said, did you create a community thanks to email addresses, or did you create a Facebook group or WhatsApp group, or which platform did you use?
So we actually created a Facebook group and then sent an email to all the links. We had the email addresses to join the Facebook group. We actually created also a Telegram group. The problem with Telegram group is that it's not very easy to mediate. The Facebook group works much better, because actually the questions that come in, you can decide if you post them or not. So you can actually mediate it a little better. So we then shut down the Telegram group. Actually, we didn't really like it for what we were doing, but Telegram is also a very easy tool if you want to accumulate people. The only thing is, you have to remember, once you create a group, is you have to keep it active. So you have to have people who every day post on that group, otherwise, like inside your company, otherwise you will lose engagement. So it's not very useful.
Question of mine, and not the audience, is when do you know you need to change the messaging, or you need to change the targets, and how often do you do it, and how radically do you change?
I mean, there are startups that change completely markets. They pivot completely. In my experience, we never really moved our market. We only redefined it. One of the things that I've learned is, when you communicate, sometimes you actually have to go towards, like, I was doing financial education. Financial education is not like a gaming app where you download it and you get immediate satisfaction. So, financial education is a product where your satisfaction comes in like 3 or 4 years. So we used to communicate a lot on this satisfaction, but the message wasn't going through. So the target market was the same, but the message was wrong. So we switched it a little bit to fear. And I know it sounds awful, but actually communicating it with fear is great. So the fear of like not having any money when you're older, or not being able to enjoy your life later on in life, etc., worked way better than actually saying, it's going to be nice and good for you. So the message changed completely, but the target market stayed the same, and it actually worked really well.
Yeah, like selling insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you do exactly the same if you were doing a B2B business, or is everything you're saying more akin to B2C models?
So I've always worked in B2C businesses, I must say. I think the difference in B2B businesses is the cycle is longer. So it takes very much more of your time to understand if you're doing something well or not, right? In a B2C business is very immediate, and that can be a good and a bad thing. I mean, people love to criticize startups on social media as much as they love to love them. B2B doesn't happen the same way, but I do think that a lot of the points that I outlined are kind of high level for everything. You need to have a why for a B2B business as well. I think what you said of B2B is very important, which is you have to identify the decision maker inside the B2B business. And that's something that is a bit different, because the customer is the customer instead the business. You've identified the business, then you have to know which is the right people to talk to inside the business. And I think that's the bigger difference. But most of what I've said, of going to touch your market very quickly, doing things that don't scale. There's a great example of Y Combinator telling Airbnb to go and do the pictures themselves, and setting up the platform with the hosts, so they can go meet them in person. And that was then what made really Airbnb sort of launch. And I think it's the same thing. If you can actually go to the business you're actually trying to help and really start to know it very well and get your hands dirty there, with the person who's running it is great. It's a great way.
And I think one of the differences also is that B2B, your clients know what they want much more than in B2C. And so even if the cycle is longer to sign them, you learn a lot early on, and they usually have a clear idea of what they want. And I always recommend to founders to really ask as many questions about the problem to their clients, to their potential clients, when it's actually quite complicated with B2C. When you ask people what they feel about money, their answers might be vague. Do you have tips, by the way, on how to know when to listen to someone or when not to?
I think one of the traps you fall into is that you read one comment or one bad review, and then you're like, oh my God, I have to change my product. And that's the wrong way of dealing with things. And I would just say that the best tool we used a product called Canny that allowed people to put advice, but we only listened to it if other people sort of voted to it. So it created a way to sort of test somebody's idea by seeing how many people really actually wanted it. So that was a great way to prioritize.
Yeah, that sounds good. There's one last question, which is how much time between the ID thought and of creating the business and the first paying customer?
Okay, this is I could do a whole topic on this, because it's I have a 30-minute talk. So next time I will do it in 1 minute, my 30-minute talk, which is, it takes a lot more time than you think. So the whole point I've always had is, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you have an idea and then thought, remember to keep your job, existing job, or some kind of way of income before you actually think that to leave it, because actually and you will have to do two things at the same time and work in the night for much longer than you think. So for us, it took nearly a year. I know startups, it takes 10 years if they're in the R&D space. So it can take a long time.
And I'll add just a little thing, and we can conclude on that, is that you should try to make everyone pay on the first day of your startup, because you learn 100 times more when you confront people to the real price of the product, rather than something you offer for free and for feedback. People that don't pay don't care, I would say. And so of course, if you're building Instagram, the strategy is to be free for a very long time. But in 99% of the businesses, try to have people pay, give it for free if they don't want to pay. But keep trying to make them pay. And indeed, it can take quite a while, and it's hard to figure out product market fit and exactly the right features that people have perceived value or real value from.
So my
amazing.
My next startup, my idea thought started July last year. So and it's not going to launch for another 6-7 months. So it's
amazing. Thank you so much, Benedetta. Always a pleasure to get to share those insights with others. I hope to see you soon in real life. And I give back the floor to our next talk.
And good luck to all the starting founders. It's going to be an amazing ride.
Luck and courage.
Yes, it's going to be great.
Cheers.
Bye.
Que la famille.